Hey, what's up? Welcome back to another video right here on Freewheel Photos. Today, I'm going to be editing a headshot using Capture One and then going into Affinity Photo. Now, many of you have been asking like, hey, Chris, where have you been? Well, I am working on getting my headshot business back up and running. And in fact, today, one of the photos is from a client in that business. So I just said, hey, I'm just going to start sharing my work because I am getting kind of drowned in the business aspect of taking care of things. So I wanted to come back to the channel, drop some content, and share that with you all. So I want to say thank you to everyone who's been checking in on me. Promise I'm doing well. Just a little sidetracked, if you will. But let's go ahead and get into some editing. So as you can see, we're in Capture One, and this is going to be the image that we edit today. Now, I've already delivered the final images to the client, and you can see one of them over here. This is one of the final images that I delivered, and I did edit this in Affinity Photo. Most of my photos I edit inside of Photoshop, but I know a lot of people on this channel specifically don't really use Photoshop, so I wanted to show an alternative. And this is one of those alternatives. So how do we get to that? Well, first thing that I like to do is, and this, let me just be clear, you don't have to use Capture One to do what I'm doing. I'm just using Capture One because that's the software that I use to capture or photograph in, because I use a tethering system, and Capture One is just the easiest by far on the market. And now that I switched to Sony cameras, even though this was shot with a Canon, all I'm saying is Capture One is by far the best for tethering. So that's the reason why I'm using Capture One right now. However, with this particular image, what I'm noticing is it's actually a little dark. And the way that I edit my headshots is I try to get the face evenly exposed as much as I can without losing dimension in the face. So I hover my mouse, and if you look at the top here, you'll see where it says 133 right now. That is the luminance value. So what I'm doing is really just clicking or hovering around until I find the hottest spot. And this is just like eyeballing it, right? So it looks like I was at 171. I think I'll call it 171 because that's the 172. And that's around here. So, all right, so 172 on the forehead, brightest spot. And then if I come over to the camera left cheek, looks like 165, so 165. So that's about a 6-point difference, which is fine. I want to be within 10. So then I'll come over to the right cheek, and I'm looking for anything between 161 and 170. And what I'm finding on the right cheek is I don't have, okay, so I got a 161 right here, 162. So I'm actually doing okay. That's within 10, right? So 162 here, 165 here, 172 here. That's all good. And then I don't worry so much about the chin when I'm photographing males that have any sort of facial hair down here, because I'm not going to get the same readouts, right? You could see I'm like way lower in the readout down here than I am anywhere else. Now, one of the features of Capture One, and I'll just share this and then we'll move on, is they have these color readouts, all right? Now, I don't use it for the color aspect personally. I use it more so, like I said, here I was around, where is it? I'm just going to drag it right there. 171, that's close enough to what I was originally at. I know that I had a 160 something in here, so I just need to find that spot again. So there's 160, and I can just click and drag, and you can see it leaves these little markers on the face, which are really helpful. So 160 there. So that is another way for me to see, okay, what are my luminance values? How well exposed am I? As you can see, I have the light in the shot. We're going to take care of that in Affinity Photo. but I get my lights fairly close to my subjects because I use speed lights and those don't have a whole lot of power. And in order for them to recycle, I have to photograph them on a lower setting. So all that comes into play, right? So I'm going to delete these readouts. I'm going to hit delete all readouts. And we're going to get into the editing aspect. So I'm going to actually put these readouts back because I want to show you what I'm doing. And I promise this is a very important step to getting the final look, because when you retouch a photo, you definitely want to make sure that you got good exposure. All right. So 165 there, and I'll just leave it at that. All right. So what I want to do is pull up on my exposure, and you can see how those numbers change. Now, 255 is pure white, or yeah, 255 is pure white. I don't want to go that far. And sometimes you can push these things into the hundreds. So what I like to do is pull up on my exposure about, somewhere around a third, right? Because the exposure slider is probably one of the most potent light manipulation sliders that are available. However, if I come over to my brightness, I'm going to start to increase the brightness as well. And 190 is usually about where I like my photos to be, because they're well exposed and I know that it looks like washed out. So now it's time for me to bring back some of that contrast and that dimension. And I got plenty of room to work with in this overall image. So I'm going to pull up on the saturation here because it's starting to wash out his skin. And that's no different than any other software. When you pull up on the exposure, it makes everything so bright that the color starts to fade. So you got to bring back some of that color intensity in the saturation. So that's what I'm doing here. But I don't want to like oversaturate them. All right. So I'm just going to pull this down until I eyeball it and it looks about right. I can always change this later, but I like to get it right in the raw file first. And all I'm doing right now is getting my exposure where I want it to be before I take it into the raw editor, or I'm sorry, the raster editor. So I think this is looking pretty good overall. Now I need to throw in just a touch of clarity. This is going to bring back some of that dimension. And I do all of these things globally. Now that they are edited globally, it's pretty good there. And I may actually throw in a little bit of structure and a touch of contrast. Now, that may be too much because I don't want him to look like overly contrasted. So I'll pull back on the clarity. And I think that this is looking pretty good. So now the next step that I like to do is I like to use the color editor, click on advanced, and we're going to modify his teeth. So I'm actually going to click on the plus icon here so I get an adjustment, and I'll label this teeth. Hit the little color picker here, and I'm going to sample a location on his teeth. All right. Now this is my color spectrum, if you will. I just pull this up a touch from what it sampled, so that way the selection or the range is a little bit larger. And what I like to do is pull down on the saturation, and this is just going to help with whitening the teeth just a touch, right? So if I pull this down pretty good, you can see it's starting to brighten up the teeth just a little bit. And I may have to increase my range here because it's not getting everything that I was looking for. Now, I will pull down the opacity on this just a little bit because I don't want to like over whiten his teeth. So somewhere around there, I think that is looking pretty good. And I think that there's enough light in the eyes overall, but I'm going to add in just a little bit of light. So this is going to be left eye. And I'm going to use a radial gradient for this. Click, drag, and put this like right over the eye here. Like that. And then push up on the exposure. I need to invert this mask so that way it's only impacting the eye. And I just want to bring it up to about the same level of exposure as the other eye. Now, the way that my lights are set up, this is supposed to be the light that is illuminating the eyes. And it's this horror or diagonal looking light that you can see in his eye here, the catch light. However, it just didn't get around his nose here and kind of cast a shadow. So I don't like my eyes to look overly dark, right? So I think that's good. Now it's time to jump into Affinity Photo and start working on the image. So what I do here is I right click on the image and I will click on Edit With. There we go, Edit With, and then Affinity Photo 2. It's gonna ask me like, how do you want to export this? Same process is this is gonna be the same idea for any editor. Just export the image or open it with Affinity Photo, and then we'll hit Edit Variant. And Affinity is going to think itself through. While it does that, I'm gonna get a sip of coffee. All right, so here we are inside of Affinity Photo, and now it's time to get to work. So first thing that you do whenever you open up a raster editor like this is duplicate the background. So I'm gonna right click and click on duplicate. And I turn off this background layer. I just leave that literally sitting in the background. And that's just if I mess something up, I can always start over without having to worry about the file being too messed up. So the first thing that I like to do with my headshots is clean up. And my cleanup work, I am going to speed through a lot of it, but I'm going to talk through what it is that I do, so that way this video isn't like epically long. So the first thing are these obvious lights that I have in my shot. Now, what's really important here, I like to leave a relatively good gap between my subject's head and the light. If the light were like closer to the hair, I don't think Affinity Photo would do a very good job of getting rid of it. Photoshop would probably do fine, but Affinity Photo, the way that we're going to get rid of this light, I don't know if it would do a very good job. So I like to leave a little bit of room in between here. And then this light is usually never really close to the subject at the top portion, but I'd leave a gap to the camera left as well. And again, it's just going to make it a little bit easier. So with the cleanup layer selected, we're going to come over to the Inpainting tool. That's going to be this little brush duster looking thing if you're using Affinity Photo 2. I forgot what it looks like in Affinity Photo 1, but the Inpainting tool is available. And that's going to be this little tool right down here. So we're going to click on that. Now, I'm going to start with this area over here. I'm going to make my brush size relatively large, not like crazy big, but big enough to make this go fast. So I'm just going to paint over this, and you can see how I'm also painting into the backdrop a little bit. It's overlap painting, and I'm just going to cover up this whole thing and release my mouse. So this is going to think itself through, and it cleans up that portion of the backdrop pretty well. And then this piece, I'm going to do the exact same thing, click and drag over it, and that should go away pretty decent as well. Now, if you are photographing things like crazy into your images and you want to try to get rid of them, that may be a little bit harder for you to do. But for me, it worked out pretty well. So now the next thing that I do is I always start from the top of my photo and work down. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Command plus, maybe twice. Yeah, twice is good. And then I'm just going to start from the top. And like I said, I work my way down. And what I'm looking for, like this little flyaway here, I'm just going to paint that out. This one over here, anything that like just blatantly stands out. So I'll get rid of the gray hairs for him, since most of his hair is black. Those gray hairs would distract from the overall image. This little speck here, and I do this relatively quick. So, and this is a scar. When you retouch people, you have to be cautious as to what it is that you are removing. Now, this I could probably leave, and he would look at it and say, yeah, this is actually a photo of me, and that's what I look like. So he wouldn't even think anything of it. Like these little specks you can get rid of, but I would be careful getting rid of things like that, just personally. Now, if it's a thing that you notice while you're photographing the individual, you can ask them how they feel about that. And if they say, nope, that's good, that's me, then go for it. Now, I don't get rid of all of the flyaway hairs because I don't think that that is necessary, and that takes way too much time, especially when you are retouching like 7 photos. That takes too much time. So I personally do not get rid of all the flyaways. But I do come over and get rid of small blemishes like so. And this is personal preference, right? You'll have to work on what it is that you want to provide in your retouching for any portrait. Now, there's a little bit of discoloration in the skin. You can see it a little bit here. So I'll just paint over that. And that worked out pretty decent. We're going to run a frequency separation where I'll really clean some of this up. But if I can keep from having to run a frequency separation, then that's great. So I'm just going to come through here and get rid of some of these little discoloration areas. And when I come down into the nose area, again, really quickly doing this. So I'm going to speed through this, and that way you're not watching me do this a whole lot. Okay, so when you get to facial features like this ingrown hair scar, likely not supposed to be there, and that is something that would go away over time. So I get rid of that, because if he's using this as a headshot photo for something, 5-6 months down the line, because it will still be a relatively representative photo of the individual, then I go ahead and get rid of those. So if it's something like this scar right here, that's going to be something that's there for probably the rest of his life. I'm going to leave that there. All right. I'm not going to get rid of that. But little things that would change over a few months, I do get rid of those. And again, got to ask the client how you feel, or how they feel about some of those things when you are photographing them. All right. So one thing that I didn't catch in this photo was his tie, and I'm not going to retouch the tie. I'm just going to leave that as is, but that is something you want to look at when you're photographing to make sure that everything is going according to plan. So the last area that I would work on is his coat here. Now, if I had a lint roller, I would have handed him one of those, but I knew that I didn't. So we actually shook his coat out. And these are just those little extra pieces that, will anyone really notice on like a LinkedIn profile or a resume cover letter or something of that sort? Probably not. However, when you are looking at the image for a very long time and it's as large as it is on my monitor, you see these things. So it's always a good idea to spend some time cleaning up the little lint spots just a little bit. You don't have to be like perfect at it, but it does make a difference in the final result. So then what I do is I come and look at my backdrop looks like this area right here. It's probably very faint on the YouTube video, but on my screen there was a little black line there, and I don't see anything else, and I don't have any sensor spots. So everything is good. Hit Command and 0 to fit this back. Now, let me show you the difference that this Inpainting brush has made on the overall image. So if I go ahead and click there, you can see all my lights come back, and those are pretty obvious. But when you look at the subject, look at how much cleaner his face looks now that I have gotten rid of a lot of those distractions. And if I can keep from using like one of those glamour retouching options like frequency separation, then I absolutely would. Like on this photo, I probably wouldn't use it, but for the sake of teaching, I will show you, and I'll probably make 2 separate versions so that way you can see the difference of the 2. So now that that is done, what I like to do at this point is cut my subject out from the background. All right. The way that I do that here in Affinity Photo is I take the selection mask tool and I just paint all the way around, and we're going to refine this mask. So this isn't like the final version of the mask, but always start with this tool to quickly select the subject. And I think that's good. And then I click on refine. So refining these masks can be a little tricky, but the goal here, or my recommendation, just leave it on matte. The default settings typically work quite well for me. So all you got to do is start painting in these areas where there's subject and background. And I'm going to zoom in just a touch here so I can get a little bit closer and hopefully more accurate. But for what I do with my cutouts, I don't have to be the most accurate. I just really want to make the hair look as natural as I can make it look. So what I like to do is work in small sections. All right. Whenever I am refining a mask, I always like to work in small sections, because if I do something that I don't like, then I can always go back and correct that a little bit easier. But really what I'm looking for is this little gray area, and I think that that worked out well up there, or well enough. And yeah, I think I am good all the way around. So Command and 0 to zoom out, and then I always apply my selection to a mask. All right, so I'm gonna hit apply to mask, hit apply, and it's going to apply it to this cleanup layer. So now that the mask has been applied, it looks like it didn't do anything. That's because I still have my background layer turned on. So I'm going to go ahead and turn that off. Now at this point, I could do a few things. I can come down here and create my own backdrop for this particular layer. So the way that I do that is create a pixel layer like I did, grab the paint bucket, and I'll just go ahead and grab a gray looking color and drop that in the background. So now I have a background, but it just doesn't look natural because I didn't shoot this on a gray backdrop like that. He looks like he was cut out, and it just doesn't look natural. So the way that I actually enjoy building my backgrounds is I shoot it well in camera first. So what I'm going to do is right click and duplicate this. And then on the photo that's underneath, I am going to turn off the mask so that I get my background. Okay. And I'm just going to rename this BG because I'm going to come back and work on the background here in a little bit. And the first thing that I like to do is adjust the brightness of the background. So I'm going to click on one of my adjustment tools down here, and I'm going to use the, we'll go with the brightness and contrast. So I'm just going to go ahead and push up on the brightness, and you'll see that the background is getting brighter. That's what we would expect of it. And then I can pull down on the contrast a little bit, and it makes this sort of lighter gray. And I'm actually going to pull the brightness back because I want to go with a darker background. And you can see how this looks way more natural to the overall image. Not quite where I want it to be. So I'm going to add in another. And this time I'm going to throw on, let's go with a recolor layer. Yeah, we'll go with recolor. So I'm going to pull down on the saturation, come somewhere over here with a bluish look. We'll pull that down, and we'll also pull down on the lightness. And that gives us kind of like that corporate vibe. You could play with this as much as you want. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time, but that is the recolor that I'm going to go with. Gives like this grayish look, even though it's more of a dark blue than gray, but that's okay. So then what I'm going to do is take a pixel layer and putting that above it, I'm going to grab my brush tool. I'll just hit the letter B this time. And I'm going to create a big splash of light right behind his head, just like that. All right. Now that looks kind of cool as is, but I want to go a little bit deeper. So I'm going to get my move tool, grab the corners here. Let me zoom out, grab the corners here, and I'm just going to expand this to make it a little bit larger. Now, this is a season to taste type of thing. Your subject and whatever you may need to do, it's going to look a little bit different, all right, or need to look a little bit different. But I like to make the gradient kind of come out from the background. So we'll hit Command and 0, zoom back in. And then what I do with this is I pull down my opacity. So it's not so like in your face that this is on the backdrop, but it's something that you can see and it can be perceived. So let me go ahead and hit Command, Option, Shift, and E because I got my first background or my first look, right? So if I were to add all of this into a group, and I'll just label this look 1 work. Yeah, we'll call it that. So I can turn that off and turn this on. And if I turn off the final look to the background, I think that this is good. I could give this to the client. He would be happy. I would be happy. And relative to me explaining this, it didn't take that much work to get to this point. Everyone can get to this point. Now, I did mention we're going to call this without frequency separation. And then I'm going to duplicate this. And we're going to call this one with freak sep. Okay, so with the frequency separation, Affinity Photo actually makes this really, really easy, even though Photoshop makes it a little hard and you got to run actions to really get it done. So what we're going to do is come up to Filters and Frequency Separation. I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to zoom in just a touch here. And what we're doing is trying to blur the skin until it all looks like a cohesive piece of skin. That's essentially what we're doing. And what we're dragging the radius slider for is to blur that. All right. So on his skin, I'm going to exaggerate it just so that way I can show you what not to do. So when you do it like this, you're blurring way too much, and that's not what you want. All right. What you really want, and the reason you don't want that is you can't really define structure here. So all of the fine details are coming out on your high frequency layer, which is not going to look the most natural. It'll look okay, but it won't look the most natural. What we're really trying to do is just blur enough to the point that the skin looks smooth. And I think right around 5.1 looks about right. And you can see, I want this, there we go. You can see that I still have my detail on my high frequency layer, and this is pretty good because I can like see his face. Now this is definitely a season of taste. Some people, they will say, you know what, I'm actually going to put my frequency layer like really, really low, but it really just depends on what. Which I did a lot of this with the Inpainting tool, so I'm not really seeing anything that I need to replace the skin with to make it more even. So this could be a mute point. There's some splotchiness here. So that's why I'm sampling and re-healing those areas, but I really don't see a whole lot that needs to be modified. Things that, like, no one is going to hold him accountable to having actual skin, like looking like a person. All right. I think that this matters the most if you have a subject where they have a ton of acne and you really need to help conceal that, then you can go with that. But I'm not seeing a whole lot of things that really need to be modified here. All I'm doing is really showcasing what you can do with this. All right. And then you can turn back on your high frequency layer. Now, I always pull down the high frequency layer because I feel like it can just be like too much in your face, and maybe here is probably good, right? So it's kind of hard to do a before and after, except for we'll go like this, Command G with freak sep, and then we'll just turn this one back on. All right, so if I turn this off and turn it back on, you could see that it is helping to clear up some of those splotchy portions of the face, but his face looks natural. All right, I'm not airbrushing this individual. I don't do that to any of my subjects. Whenever I photograph and edit photos of people, I always want them to look like people. But you can see that there are some of those areas that were very visible without the frequency sep, which I personally don't think I needed to modify. But if I turn this on, you can see that they're kind of gone. And yeah, so hopefully that makes sense. Now, what I need to do is save this image back out so that way I can deliver it or put it back inside of Capture One. So the way that I'm going to do that is I am going to come to File, Export, and I'm always saving my files as a TIFF and then I export to a JPEG in my other software. All right, be it Capture One, Luminar, or On1, or I'm sorry, not Luminar, Lightroom. So Capture One, Lightroom, or On1. That's where I actually store my files, categorize them, organize them, and export them. So I'm going to go ahead and just export this as is. It's going to ask me where I want to save it, and I will save it here, and I'm just going to call this YT in the front so it's easier for me to find, and I'll hit save. Okay, so now that that's saved, it's time to bring it back and do the final touches to the image. We're going to come over to library because it'll be the easiest to show you how this works in the library module. I'm going to click on file, or actually, I'm just going to click on import right here. I'm going to go to the folder that I have all of these in, which is this folder. And there's the YT one, review for import. I'm going to go ahead and check this to import it, import the image, and there it is. Again, a lot of the final images that I already delivered. Now that I have the final image ready to deliver, I like to give my photos a crop, all right? And that crop is usually in a 4:5 ratio because that's just what works on all of the social platforms. And what I like to do is, I wish I could keep this grid up, but you could see the center box, that top line. So the top third, the line that's separating the middle third from the top third. I like to get that as close to my eyes as I possibly can. All right. So what I'm going to do is click and drag this down until I get to a point where I'm comfortable. Like, I don't think you need a whole lot of room above the head. Depending on what you're using this for and the client, you're going to have to ask them. But I usually don't think you need a whole lot of room. And this is a horizontal headshot. And then I center them up as best as I can with the eyes. I'm not worried about the rest of the body. It's always about the eyes. All right. And this is a portrait of a person. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to do a clone variant because I do give two different options whenever I deliver to my client. And then the second option is just going to be a portrait edit because this is what the classic headshot looks like. Everybody knows what this is. And when they think of headshot, this is what they think of. So I give them that. And I do the same thing. Again, trying to get that top third line as close to the eyes as I can. He does have a little button on his lapel, and I try not to cut off features of the clothing if it's something of significance. Since he has this little button on his lapel, what I like to do is pull that over, and I'll sacrifice a little bit of my composition to make sure that those features are in there because he put it on intentionally. And during this session, he actually moved it up so it would be in the photo. So I told him, you know, so I know that that is something that's important to him. He wants it in the image. So now I have my final edits for the two images that I would deliver to the client, which, like I said, I've already delivered to the client. So it is what it is. But I wanted to share that with you all here on the channel. So if you found value, go ahead and smash that like button. It really does help to share this with others who are probably looking for something similar. And if you want to find more content or get more content, hit that subscribe button. And don't forget to check that bell icon. Man, I sound like a thirsty YouTuber. Look, this is the channel that you want to be a part of in order to grow your photo editing skills. All right. I'm a real person. I'll answer your questions and I'll help you as best I can to get to the end result that you're looking for. So if that's something you are into, then you are in the right place. All right. So until next time, I want you to stay inspired and keep creating. Peace.